Are you looking for the best AV receiver? In this video, we will look at some of the best AV receiver on the market. Before we get started with our video, we have included links in the description, so make sure you check those out to see which one is in your budget range. Number 3. When you're onto a good thing, stick to it. Perhaps the most surprising thing about the Marantz NR1711, the first and smaller of two Marantz receivers reviewed this issue, is that the other major brands haven't copied its form factor. It's the size of a normal stereo hi-fi amplifier, rather than having the double height hulk of a chassis more common to AV receivers. Not that Marantz can't hulk with the best of them, but here we have what the company calls a slimline receiver, a nice compromise for those who want the proper quality for a surround sound experience, but don't want the bulk of most receivers. And yes, this is a proper home theater receiver, with 7 channels able to be configured in all the usual surround sound ways: 7.1 channels, all surround plus subwoofer, 5.1 channels plus a stereo zone B, 5.1 channels with the front stereo pair given additional power by biamping, or 5.1.2 with 2 overhead channels for the height information of Dolby Atmos or DTS, X soundtracks. Each amp channel is rated at 50 watts, measured at full bandwidth allowing 0.08% THD into 8 ohms, 2 channels driven dose 50 W seem inadequate when so many receivers these days are 100 W. Understand that the difference amounts to just 3 decibels. Yes, more power is always welcome, but you do have to trade something for the relatively compact size here. That said, as always, if you have loudspeakers with very special needs, you should be guided by their requirements. This receiver does support the use of 4-ohm loudspeakers on all channels with an advanced setup menu option. And despite the necessarily limited rear panel space, the Marantz NR1711 AV receiver does offer line-level outputs for the front speaker pair, which means that you can upgrade in the future just by adding a stereo power amplifier for whatever amount of power you can afford. That rear panel has a good selection of inputs. There are 6 HDMI inputs, down 1 from last year. The trade-off for that is that the 6th HDMI input, and the HDMI output, now support 4K video up to 100 and 120 Hz, and 8K video at 24, 25, 30, 50 and 60 Hz. We understand that there may be some limits to those resolutions, possibly problems with HDR encoded content at 4K, 120 Hz, due to limitations in the first generation of chips developed for these resolutions. We have not been able to test this. Number 2. Despite the protestations of those who take them, a gap year rarely results in any kind of self-improvement. That's where the Denon AV-CX6700H differs. It took a year off and come back more interesting than it was before. The 6000 lineage was one of those. Denon decided not to upgrade in 2019, waiting until 2020 to double down on those usually annual improvements. Upon returning, it has managed to eke out yet more performance and reassess, if not exactly redefine, what is achievable with a $2,000 home cinema amp. The release of these new models is rooted more in the adoption of new technologies than any attempt to dramatically improve an already class-leading audio performance. And the AV-CX6700H has certainly stocked up on those. The headline is the new HDMI section, with one of the AV-CX6700H's 8 inputs and 2 of its 3 outputs being HDMI 2.1 certified and therefore enabling full support for 8K at up to 60 Hz and 4K at 120 Hz. While the other 7 HDMI inputs are only 2.0 certified, they do still support 2.1 features such as VRR, variable refresh rate, ALLM, auto low latency mode, QMS quick media switching, and QFT quick frame transport. All inputs also support HDR10+ as well as HDR10, HLG and Dolby Vision, and one of the outputs features EARC, Enhanced Audio Return Channel. Despite this heavy focus on next-gen technologies, unfortunately, AV-CX6700H models manufactured before May 2021 contain a faulty HDMI 2.1 chip that prevents support of 4K gaming at 120 Hz via the Xbox Series 10. This issue affected all of Denon and Marantz's 2020 AVRs, but Denon models with serial numbers that end with 70001 onwards should be bug-free, as they boast an upgraded HDMI 2.1 chip. And should you be in possession of an older model, then you can get hold of Sound United's external HDMI adapter as well as its 11 channels of power amplification, at a claimed 205 W per channel, and processing for 13, which means you can extend your speaker package with an outboard power amplifier. The AV-CX6700H affords 13 channels of DTS X decoding, with DTS X Pro technology coming at a later date via a firmware update. It shores up an audio arsenal that already supported most 3D formats, including Dolby Atmos, Atmos Height Virtualization, DTS, X, DTS Virtual, X, IMAX Enhanced and Auro 3D. There is also a new pre-amplifier mode that clears the signal path when using outside amplification. Number 1. We shall return to the tuner thing, because we think it's interesting, but first let's get into the core of the Marantz SR8015 multi-channel amplifier. Because it's the real deal. It comes equipped with 11 amplifier channels, each rated at up to 140 W output into 8 ohms across the full audio bandwidth, at minuscule 0.05% levels of total harmonic distortion, 2 channels driven. The amplifiers can be set to run optimally with 8, 6 or 4 ohm loads on all channels. We suppose that there exist some particularly exotic speakers somewhere in the world which may not work well with this receiver, but as we'll see, it seemed very comfortable even with quite difficult loads. The nominal reason for 11 channels is that it supports a set of speakers up to 7.2.4. That is front left, center and right, then surround left and right, also surround rear left and right, plus 2 subs and 4 overhead speakers. Yes, we know that Dolby Atmos and DTS, X are flexible enough to take advantage of even more loudspeakers, but this setup is what the industry seems to have adopted as a full, mainstream arrangement. And there is definitely a case of diminishing returns in the number of channels. 5.1 is enormously better than 2.0 with appropriate content, 7.1 is a little better than 5.1, and 5.1.2 or 5.1.4 is markedly better. Going from 7.1.4 to something higher will provide only very subtle improvements unless you're dealing with complex or large seating arrangements. There are the usual flexible arrangements available for the amplifier channels. You can redirect a couple to bi-amplify the front speakers, or set a couple to drive a second zone. In fact, a third zone is also offered by this amplifier, along with a dedicated HDMI output for a second zone, a dedicated composite video for a second zone, and the ability to reassign the component video output to another zone. Yes, this amplifier still has plenty of composite and component video inputs, including a composite video input on the front panel in case you, well, perhaps you want to briefly plug in an old VCR to play an ancient tape. The amplifier includes video conversion capabilities, the component and composite video inputs can both be converted to HDMI and upscaled all the way to the max, though only if the input is 480i, 60 or 576i, 50. To see higher resolutions sent to the component video inputs, you'll have to plug the component video outputs into your TV. Assuming it's a model that still supports component video. As for HDMI inputs, there are plenty of those. And one of them is special, it supports 8K video at up to 50/60p, and 4K at up to 100/120p. That's for your latest generation gaming machine. Doubts have been cast about the ability of the first generation of HDMI chips in AV receivers and amplifiers when it comes to handling 100/120ths of a Hz 4K and 8K in all its incarnations, such as with HDR encoding. Time will reveal the extent of this. All HDMI input resolutions can be upscaled to anything higher, all the way